Welcome back to The Life with the Browns. For 20 seasons, Sister Wives fans thought they had already witnessed the full extent of the Brown family's dysfunction. The passive-aggressive couch interviews, the tear-soaked confessionals where wives quietly admitted they felt invisible, the infamous Christmas blow-up that sent Janelle storming into the cold Arizona night. We believed that was the worst of it. But this week's episode shattered that illusion completely because it confirmed that everything we saw on camera was only the surface layer of something far darker. Christine Brown has finally said out loud what insiders have whispered for years. She heard the fights, not rumors, not secondhand stories. She heard Meri and Kody screaming at each other behind closed doors, and according to Christine, she heard everything. And the way this truth came out? Almost painfully ironic. This wasn't revealed during a dramatic sit-down, a tell-all, or a carefully staged TLC moment. It slipped out casually while Christine was talking with her husband, David Woolley, about renovating their basement in Utah. As they discussed walls and space and memories, Christine quietly admitted that living below the rest of the family had given her an unwanted front-row seat to chaos the cameras never caught. The symbolism is impossible to ignore. Christine, who spent years being labeled the basement wife, wasn't just beneath the other wives physically. She was underneath the emotional warfare. Every slammed door, every muffled scream, every explosive argument that the Brown family worked overtime to hide from production. While viewers saw carefully edited storylines, Christine was absorbing raw, unfiltered reality. She didn't just feel last in the family hierarchy, she heard what last place really. What Kody Brown admitted next might be one of the most damning confessions of his entire Sister Wives run, and he said it without realizing how bad it made him look. He acknowledged that he hadn't spoken to Meri directly in years. Not months. Not awkward check-ins. Years. Every single interaction had gone through attorneys, property, money, assets. Lawyers handled what once belonged to a marriage sealed for time and all eternity. Two people who once claimed a sacred bond couldn't even exchange a sentence without legal buffers in between. And yet, somehow, Kody truly believed that showing up to a picnic table with a pocket full of rehearsed apologies would magically erase all that distance. Sources close to production say Kody walked into Cedar City convinced this meeting would be a win for him. In his mind, Meri would be grateful, maybe emotional, maybe relieved that he had finally decided she was worth acknowledging. He expected tears. He expected softness. He expected forgiveness simply because he showed up. What he got instead was a woman who shut that fantasy down immediately. Meri made it clear to the cameras that she was deeply guarded. She had no idea what this conversation was actually supposed to be about, and based on their history, she had zero reason to believe it would go well. Their last few interactions had been disasters. Why would this suddenly be different? That picnic table in Cedar City has already cemented itself as reality TV history. Because that's where Meri Brown finally stopped playing the role she'd been stuck in for decades, the desperate first wife waiting patiently for crumbs of affection. And then Kody started talking. If there were a drinking game where viewers took a sip every time Kody Brown said the word apologize in this episode, emergency rooms across America would have been overrun before the first commercial break. What should have been a sincere moment of accountability turned into a bizarre verbal endurance test. I apologize. Nothing but goodwill. Let the luggage float down the river. Over and over and over again. It wasn't remorse, it was repetition. Like watching a malfunctioning robot stuck on loop, desperately hoping that the sheer quantity of apologies could compensate for their complete lack of substance. Meri saw through it instantly. Sitting across from him, watching him cycle through the same hollow phrases, she finally said what every viewer was yelling at their screen. She told him directly that he needed to stop saying the word apologize, because the more he repeated it, the more insincere the entire conversation felt. It was a surgical strike. Kody was visibly thrown off. His entire strategy depended on that word. He believed it was magic. Say it enough times and forgiveness would automatically follow. Instead, Meri dismantled the performance in real time. And then came the infamous luggage metaphor. Kody leaned on it so hard it crossed into unintentional comedy. He kept telling Meri not to pull the luggage out of the river, clearly meaning she should leave the past buried. At one point, he switched metaphors entirely, talking about furniture floating downstream, apparently forgetting which household items he'd already sacrificed to the analogy gods. Meri's response was perfect. She told him she didn't even bring the furniture. When Kody looked genuinely confused, she clarified it was a joke. And his reaction? Priceless. He honestly didn't realize they were at a point where humor was allowed. That moment alone said everything about how emotionally frozen their relationship had been for years. But Meri wasn't done. In one of the most self-aware moments she's ever had on this show, she explained that Kody's non-stop apology language actually confirmed her worst suspicions. This wasn't sincerity. This was performance. Every time he said, "I apologize," without acknowledging specific harm, the words lost more meaning. Kody's confessional made it even worse. He admitted, without irony, that he believed nobody could hate someone who apologized 100 times. He completely missed the point. Apologizing without understanding why you're apologizing isn't healing. It's noise. It's verbal wallpaper slapped over decades of emotional damage without fixing anything underneath. Fans immediately flooded social media with the same observation. Apologizing 100 times doesn't make you easier to forgive. It makes you easier to resent because it proves you've learned nothing. The word salad dragged on. Rivers. Bridges. Goodwill. Metaphors piled on top of metaphors until it felt like the English language itself was begging for mercy. But Meri was just getting started. For years, Meri Brown existed on the outskirts of her own family. The first wife, who somehow became the forgotten wife. While Robin soaked up Kody's attention and validation, Meri was sidelined, present, but never included. Holidays happened around her. Decisions were made without her. Her presence became optional. Something changed in Cedar City. The woman who had spent decades shrinking herself to fit Kody's ego finally stopped moving out of the way. The moment that had fans cheering came when Meri looked him straight in the eye and told him he was not going to shut her down anymore.
No yelling. No hysteria.
Just calm, grounded certainty. The confidence of someone who had finally realized her worth after years of being told she didn't have any. Kody's reaction was immediate and defensive. He tried to flip the narrative, claiming Christine, Janelle, and even Robin had told him that Meri always gets to say whatever she wants. Using his other wives as shields against accountability was classic Kody Brown behavior. And this is where the manipulation becomes impossible to ignore. He showed up claiming he wanted to apologize, but spent most of the conversation trying to control what Meri was allowed to say in response. He wanted a one-way exchange. He would unload his rehearsed sentiments, and she was expected to absorb them quietly with gratitude. The moment Meri tried to explain how his actions affected her, he shut it down. "I'm just here to apologize," became his verbal barricade, an excuse to avoid any real dialogue. Because what Kody wanted wasn't reconciliation. He wanted absolution without accountability. And for the first time in decades, Meri Brown refused to give it to him. The cruelty of the moment was not lost on viewers. Kody claimed he wanted to clear the air. He insisted he was ready to move forward. But at the same time, he flat out refused to let Meri participate in that process. And that contradiction exposed everything. An apology that does not allow the wounded person to speak is not an apology, it's a performance. One designed to soothe the offender's conscience while leaving the actual harm untouched and unresolved. Meri saw that immediately. In her confessional, she calmly explained that the longer the conversation went on, and the more Kody blocked her from responding, the clearer it became that this meeting was never about healing. It was about him. His image. His need to feel absolved without doing the work. What longtime viewers found so powerful was watching Meri finally trust her own reality. For years, she doubted herself. She wondered if she was too difficult, too needy, too emotional. She questioned whether she had somehow driven Kody away, whether the loneliness and emotional exile she lived in was something she deserved. This episode showed a very different Meri Brown, one who finally understood that staying silent to keep the peace had only enabled her own mistreatment. Kody didn't want a conversation. He wanted compliance. He wanted the version of Meri who nodded politely, swallowed her pain, and accepted whatever emotional scraps he tossed her way. The grateful wife. The quiet wife. The convenient wife. Instead, he was sitting across from a woman who had found her voice, and she was no longer willing to give it back. Then came the moment that redefined the entire episode, and honestly, the entire Sister Wives timeline. During what should have been an ordinary conversation with her husband, David Woolley, about renovating their basement in Utah, Christine casually dropped a revelation that completely reframed the Brown family history. Almost offhandedly, she admitted that she heard Meri and Kody fighting. Not occasional disagreements. Not mild marital tension. She heard everything. In the early Lehigh days, the walls separating the wives' living spaces were thin enough to carry every raised voice, every slammed door, every bitter exchange the family worked desperately to keep hidden from TLC cameras. Christine wasn't just living beneath Meri physically, she was absorbing the emotional fallout of a marriage in collapse. Let that sink in. Christine spent years in that basement, raising children, managing chaos, and being labeled the low-maintenance wife, while upstairs, a marriage was imploding in ways viewers never saw. She wasn't just at the bottom of the hierarchy. She was an unwilling witness to dysfunction that predated Robin entirely. While fans were being sold the fantasy that love is multiplied, not divided, Christine was hearing proof that something had been broken for a very long time. This confession adds devastating context to everything we thought we knew. Production insiders have long suggested that fights between Meri and Kody were frequent and intense during the early seasons. The family had perfected the art of presenting a united front when cameras were rolling, saving the real conflicts for moments they believed were private. Christine's basement placement meant she heard the unfiltered truth. She heard Kody's tone when he thought no one was listening. She heard Meri's frustration reach a breaking point behind closed doors. And suddenly, so much makes sense. David Woolley's reaction during this conversation said what fans have been debating for nearly 2 decades. He asked the uncomfortable question out loud. When one wife clearly becomes the favorite, when the hierarchy becomes impossible to ignore, whose fault is that? Christine initially tried to spread the blame, saying it was everyone's fault. Years of conditioning don't disappear overnight. But David pushed back with striking clarity. And in that moment, it became clear that the basement wife didn't just survive the Brown family hierarchy. She saw it forming, cracking, and collapsing from the very bottom up. David didn't hesitate. He said what so many viewers have been screaming for years. He said it was the man's fault. If the husband positions himself as the leader of the family, spiritually, emotionally, structurally, then the responsibility for that structure turning toxic lands squarely on him.
Christine didn't argue. She didn't deflect.
She didn't rush to Kody's defense the way she once would have. Her silence said everything. It was the silence of someone who has already done the math. Someone who has been quietly undoing decades of conditioning since walking away in 2021. Christine spent 25 years believing she needed to try harder, be better, accept less. Hearing those fights through basement walls should have been her warning sign. Instead, she normalized the dysfunction because she had never known anything else. And that realization opens the door to even darker questions. If Christine heard that level of fighting, what did the children hear? What did they witness when cameras weren't around? What moments shaped their complicated, fractured relationships with their father long before viewers ever noticed the cracks? But just when it seemed impossible for the episode to deliver another jaw-dropping moment, Christine casually detonated a second bombshell, and social media instantly exploded. During that same basement renovation conversation, while discussing the realities of growing up in a polygamous community, Christine dropped a fact that had never been explicitly stated in 20 seasons of this show. She and Kody Brown are blood relatives, third cousins once removed. Christine delivered this revelation with a casual tone of someone announcing a favorite ice cream flavor. David, meanwhile, looked like his brain had completely short-circuited. His stunned response, simply saying, "Wow, perfectly mirrored what millions of viewers were feeling at home. 20 seasons, endless specials,
Wedding episodes.
tell-alls, and somehow, the fact that Christine and Kody share actual DNA had never once been discussed on camera. Christine explained that growing up in the Apostolic United Brethren community meant she always assumed she'd have to marry a convert because she was related to nearly everyone in the church. The community is small, insular, and intermarried across generations until family trees become nearly impossible to untangle. She thought Meri and Kody would solve that problem. She was wrong. Even Kody, who entered polygamy as an adult rather than being born into it, turned out to be her distant cousin. Christine quickly reassured David that third cousins once removed is fully legal, emphasizing fully as if repetition might make the situation feel less surreal. Then she added, with perfect timing, that polygamy is not legal, highlighting the absurdity of which relationships society chooses to criminalize. Janelle later confirmed in her own confessional that this cousin connection had always been an inside joke within the family. In polygamous communities, these overlaps are common. The dating pool is so limited that distant familial ties are almost unavoidable. According to Janelle, Christine and Kody joked about being cousins throughout their marriage, treating it as a quirky footnote rather than the shocking revelation it became for viewers. And that raises another uncomfortable question. If this was common knowledge inside the Brown household, why was it never mentioned publicly? Insiders speculate production knew but avoided the topic to preserve the family-friendly image sister wives originally tried to sell. But now, with the illusion fully collapsed, fans aren't buying that silence was accidental. Social media lit up pointing out just how tangled the Brown family tree really is. Janelle is technically Kody's stepsister. Her mother married his father. Christine is his cousin. The family connections now resemble a diagram that requires advanced mathematics to understand. And that revelation naturally flowed into a deeper, more damning discussion about hierarchy. As Christine and David talked through the basement renovation, the symbolism became impossible to ignore. Christine spent years as the literal basement wife, living on the lowest level of the Lehigh house while feeling like she occupied the lowest rung in Kody's priorities. Now, she was remodeling a basement in a home where her voice mattered, with a husband who actually listened. The contrast couldn't be more striking. David asked the question that cut straight to the core of polygamous dysfunction. Whose fault is it when one wife becomes so clearly favored that everyone else feels invisible? Christine initially offered the diplomatic answer, spreading the blame across everyone involved. But David wasn't having it. He pushed back firmly. In a family where the man claims leadership and spiritual authority, the man bears responsibility when that system turns poisonous. If one wife walks around like she owns the place while others feel like servants, the husband allowed that dynamic to grow. Christine didn't argue. She didn't defend Kody. She didn't defend the system she had devoted her entire adult life to. Her quiet reaction suggested she had already reached the same conclusion. Decades spent blaming herself for not being enough, not being agreeable enough, not succeeding at plural marriage, suddenly gave way to clarity. Hearing her new husband articulate what should have been obvious all along seemed to settle something deep within her. The conversation then turned to pre-Robin dynamics, with both Christine and Meri acknowledging that Kody actually did a better job rotating attention among wives before the fourth marriage. Imperfect, yes, but functional. That balance collapsed the moment Robin entered the picture. Suddenly, one wife had the legal marriage, the lavish wedding, the diamonds, the mansion on the hill. The others were left competing for scraps of attention that grew rarer by the year. Robin attempted damage control in her confessional, insisting that hierarchies were never endorsed by their church. If such dynamics existed, she claimed, it was because people weren't being cool with each other. The audacity of that statement had fans howling. Because after everything revealed in this episode, one thing is now undeniable. The hierarchy was real, the damage was deliberate, and the women who once blamed themselves are finally done carrying a burden that was never theirs to begin with. Robin, living comfortably in her $1 $65 million Flagstaff mansion, stood in front of the cameras lecturing everyone else about being cool. The disconnect between her words and the reality viewers have watched unfold for years was staggering. While other wives struggled financially, emotionally, and spiritually, Robin preached harmony from the top of the hill, literally and figuratively. Kody, of course, had his own version of events. He insisted he never promoted a pecking order. And when hierarchy became obvious, his solution was peak Kody Brown leadership. He went to work and told the wives to go to church and figure it out themselves.
No intervention. No accountability.
No leadership. Just spiritual outsourcing and emotional neglect dressed up as authority. While Kody was busy fumbling his apology tour in Utah, the cameras followed Janelle, quietly and methodically taking steps to permanently sever her spiritual ties to the man she spent nearly 3 decades calling her husband. The scene shifted to North Carolina, where Janelle sat down with her daughter, Madison, to discuss pursuing a formal spiritual release from the Apostolic United Brethren Church. What should have been a simple conversation about religious paperwork quickly turned into a brutal reckoning with the damage plural marriage had done to their family. Madison's reaction was instant and unfiltered. What the actual? Even through TLC's careful editing, her shock was unmistakable. But that surprise quickly turned into clarity. Madison didn't hesitate to say what she truly believes. Plural marriage is toxic. Coming from someone raised inside the system, who watched her mother share a husband with 3 other women, those words carried real weight. Janelle explained that she wanted to end her covenant with Kody properly, giving the spiritual marriage the same respect she would a legal divorce. She reached out to Meri for guidance, since Meri had already navigated the process and received her release on grounds of abandonment. The irony couldn't be thicker. Meri, the wife Kody publicly neglected for years, became the guide helping Janelle find her freedom. But Janelle wasn't confident it would be granted. Unlike Meri, whose abandonment was undeniable, Janelle worried the church might view her situation differently. She and Kody had maintained the appearance of a functioning relationship longer. What if leadership denied her request? What if she was forced to remain spiritually bound to a man who had already emotionally checked out? Madison asked the question that mattered most. What happens if they say no? Janelle admitted it would create a genuine crisis of faith. She would feel released by God even if the church refused to acknowledge it, placing her personal conviction in direct conflict with institutional authority. After 15 years away from active participation, the fact that she still cared enough to seek closure revealed just how deeply these beliefs had shaped her. Kody's response, when informed of Janelle's plans, was predictably dismissive. He claimed he couldn't remember if she'd even told him. He floated the idea that he'd tried to get his own release but was denied. Truth or convenient excuse? With Kody, it's impossible to tell anymore. Then came the most viscerally uncomfortable moment of the entire episode. Meri, attempting to steer their conversation towards something that actually mattered, looked at Kody and expressed hope that he had reached a place where he could say he didn't regret their marriage, especially because of the children their family produced. It was generous. It was vulnerable. It was an attempt at common ground. Kody's response was chilling. He reached across the picnic table, grabbed Meri's hand, and pressed it down against the wood, not as comfort, but as control. The word he used has already become infamous among fans. Verboten. Forbidden. He told her discussing the children was completely off-limits.
Period.
End of discussion. Meri looked genuinely confused. She later admitted she didn't even know what the word meant. Kody clarified coldly, they were not going to talk about the kids. That single moment revealed more about Kody's psychological state than all his rehearsed apologies combined. This is a man estranged from the majority of his 13 children with Meri, Janelle, and Christine. Multiple kids have publicly stated they haven't heard from him in years. Leon confirmed Kody ignored them at Garrison's funeral. Gabriel told Janelle that his father demanded an apology without ever explaining what he'd done wrong. The estrangement is public.
Documented.
Devastating. And yet, when given a chance to acknowledge even a shred of regret about fractured relationships with his own children, Kody shut it down, with physical force and a German vocabulary word. He wants forgiveness from his ex-wives while refusing to acknowledge the human beings those marriages created. Even more telling, this wasn't the first time children became a forbidden topic. David Woolley tried to bring up the kids during Kody's meeting with Christine, and that conversation was shut down just as fast. Whatever Kody believes he's doing spiritually, accountability as a father is not part of the journey. And then, because the universe clearly has a sense of humor, Kody suddenly announced he urgently needed to use the bathroom. He literally ran away. Cameras captured the self-proclaimed patriarch jogging across the park, fleeing the conversation like a man trying to outrun his own conscience. Production gleefully kept the footage. Meri sat alone at the picnic table and delivered one final, perfectly timed joke about hoping nothing leaked given his age. Even she couldn't resist one last jab. When the dust settled in Cedar City, one truth was undeniable. Kody Brown's apology tour was never about healing. It was never about growth. It was never about accountability. It was about Kody. Meri summed it up perfectly in her confessional. If he needed this, he could have it because the entire exercise was for him. Not for her. Not for Janelle. Not for Christine. For Kody and whatever version of God he believes is keeping score. The episode ended with Meri thanking Kody for what she called a wonderful and fascinating life experience. The words were polite, detached, and final. She wasn't grateful, she was finished. She had accepted that he would never be capable of giving her what she needed. Kody, of course, mistook her composure for victory. What this episode accomplished, 20 seasons in, was remarkable. Viewers finally got the confrontation they'd waited years for. Not screaming. Not chaos. Something far more powerful. 3 women calmly demonstrating they had moved on, while the man who once controlled their lives floundered through hollow gestures of reconciliation. Christine has her fairy tale marriage with David. Janelle has her land, her independence, and her grandchildren. Meri has her business, her freedom, and a life that no longer revolves around begging for affection. And Kody? He remains in a mansion with Robin, estranged from most of his children, clinging to the delusion that saying sorry enough times can rewrite history. The man who once commanded a family of 23 now struggles to maintain relationships outside his Flagstaff bubble. His apology tour didn't redeem him. It exposed him. Sources close to production confirm season 21 has already been filmed, with rumors of potential reunions and even more explosive confrontations ahead. Christine has hinted that developments are coming that will shock longtime viewers. The Brown family story is far from over. But one thing is clear now, the ex-wives are done protecting Kody's image. The basement wife heard everything. The first wife finally spoke her truth. The second wife is cutting her spiritual chains. And the fourth wife is running out of excuses for the man she chose over sisterhood. 20 seasons in, Sister Wives has finally become the show fans always wanted it to be. Drop your thoughts below. Do you think Kody can ever repair these relationships? Like, subscribe, and stay tuned. The next video is waiting, and you won't want to miss what comes next.